can begin now.
Good. How's everyone doing? Great. I'm going to introduce Andrew, although he needs little introduction. Andrew is a director, an award-winning travel writer, and an actor. He served as editor-at-large with National Geographic Traveler magazine, and has written for New York Times, Wall Street Journal, LA Times, Atlantic, Times Magazine, and many more. Probably enough introduction.
It just makes me feel old.
Does it? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the glasses that make me feel old. So, Jamie is my father-in-law. And
I'm sorry.
yeah, I know. It's a burden. If only we were more energetic, it would be easier. And he very enthusiastically said, I would like you to interview Andrew because of this book. And it all made sense. It is an incredibly moving book.
Oh, thanks.
And I've also walked the Camino, probably 1998, so more towards your first time of walking it. What made you walk the Camino in the first place?
Well, should we explain a little what the Camino is for those who might not know?
Possibly.
The Camino de Santiago, this is a book about, I walked the Camino de Santiago, which is an ancient pilgrimage route, for 500 miles across the north of Spain. And it came into being in about the 8th century when the Catholic Church said that the bones of the Apostle James had been discovered in the farthernmost reach of the Iberian Peninsula, and anybody who walked across Spain to that spot would get half their time in purgatory knocked off, which was, a pretty good deal, right? So, but what it really, the cynic would say it was about was real estate, because Islam had taken over the Iberian Peninsula and the Catholic Church wanted it back. So they said, while you're marching to get your almighty soul purged and cleansed, kick out those damn Moors. And so it was the beginning of the Crusades, the Knights Templar, and all this bloody, gory history where Christianity took back the Iberian Peninsula. And so that's how it began, and people have walked it ever since then. And after the church got Spain back, it kind of fell out of favor, and people stopped. Very few people walked it for centuries. And then in the 20th century, it's sort of largely through the efforts of one priest, and then the Spanish Tourist Office, it sort of came back. And I walked it first in 94, I believe. And you walked it, what, 98, you say?
Yeah, 98.
Yeah, it's different. And then I walked it again several years ago, 3 years ago now, 2.5 years ago now, with my son, who was 19 years old at the time. And we walked it together. And it had been a life-changing... What was your question? No. Why did I walk the first time?
Why did you walk the first time?
Oh, that's interesting. So in the early mid-'90s, I had barely survived a career as a young actor. And I was thrown into a group called the Brat Pack, and we were very successful. We represented this, the seismic change in the movies, really, how the movies went from being about grown-ups to being about kids. And I was at the forefront, me and a group of other actors were at the forefront of that transition in Hollywood. And that was a thrilling, exciting, wondrous, traumatic event in my life. And by the mid-'90s, that had kind of faded. And I was ill-equipped. This is another seminar, doctor. But I was sort of ill-equipped to deal with a lot of that fame, and it just wouldn't. I felt like I was tumbled in the backwash of it a bit. And so I was, without knowing, I was sort of looking for something. And I was in a bookstore. I was in Rizzoli Bookstore on West Broadway in New York, long gone now. Anyway, and I'm an actor, right? So that means I'm unemployed most of the time. And I was just killing time. And really, I was just looking at this beautiful woman across the new arrivals table. And I was just staring at her. And this is true. And finally, she looked up. She felt the eyes of some pervert upon her. And she looked up. And instead of giving her my best Pretty in Pink kind of hi, I just was completely flustered, and I went, oh my God, there it is! And I just grabbed the book that was in front of me, and I ran to the register, because I just was like, oh my God, it was so embarrassing. And I just bought this book and just got out of the store. And when I got out, finally, I said, what did I just buy? And it was this book called Off the Road by a fellow named Jack Hitt, and it was about his walking of the Camino de Santiago. And I always mention Jack when I talk about this book and his book, because as you all know, because you're here, books change lives. And his book changed my life. And I wasn't interested in it at all. I learned all the history that I just told you, and I was like, who cares? I don't care about this. But I was getting on a plane to Los Angeles a few days later, and I needed something to read, and so I took the book with me. And by the time I landed in Los Angeles, I was going to Spain. I don't know why, I'm doing that. I'd never camped, I'd never hiked, I didn't do anything. I grew up in New Jersey, we went to the mall. But I just said, I'm doing that. And I went, and well, first I called up Jack and asked him, because it was the early 90s, right? There was no one on the internet but, Al Gore, right? And I never heard of the Camino. So anyway, I called up in the back of the book. It said the author wrote for Harper's Magazine. So I called him up at Harper's and said, Jack, I read your book. And he was like, you read my book? He was thrilled. Yeah, I know the feeling. And so anyway, he encouraged me, told me to go. I went, and I hated it. It was awful. It was just a misery. One day was worse than the next. And then about 2 weeks into, this is a long answer, isn't it? About 2 weeks into my walk.
It's a long walk. It's a long walk. It can be a long answer. It's fine.
Anyway, so I'm miserable. I would have gone home after 3 days, except I'd bragged to everyone that I was going to walk across Spain for 5 weeks. And, I couldn't just show up after 3 days and go, change my mind. And, so I went to Spain. And anyway, I walked, and it was miserable, and I hated it. And I didn't know why I hated it. I was just lonely and unhappy, and I didn't like any of the people. I wasn't into the history. The food was bad. I had blisters. It was just awful. And about halfway through the walk, there's a thing called, as you know, the high meseta, which is like the 3 or 4 days of just wheat fields to the horizon. Don Quixote was in the southern meseta. No wonder he was tilting at windmills. It's the place that drives walkers crazy, right? And so, you walk you see to the horizon, it's just wheat in every direction. And then you get to the horizon, and it's wheat to the horizon. And it's just awful. And it's just like, what am I doing with my life? And like the third day I was in the wheat fields, I just suddenly found myself on my knees, sobbing, weeping, screaming up at God that I half believed in, and calling him a motherfucker, and all the things that my Catholic upbringing told me I was going to hell for saying. Anyway, I had this terrible temper tantrum. And when that finally subsided, my limousine did not come pick me up. And I had to keep trudging. And so the next day, I was just sort of miserable the rest of the day. The next day I woke up and I set out again, and I felt like I was forgetting something. I was like, and I checked my pack, I double-checked my pack. I just felt like I didn't have something. I was forgetting something. Anyway, a couple hours into my walking that morning, I stopped by the side of a barn the way we do to have my little morning snack of, cheese and stale bread. And I'm sitting there by this barn, and I was aware that I was seeing things very crisply, like the umber of the earth, and I could hear things like birds call and respond. I just felt really awake. And I slowly had this realization that sort of came up from inside, but really it felt like it was coming to the horizon toward me, because it was just coming and there was no stopping it, and I knew something was coming up. I don't know how to describe it other than that. It was just something's coming. And I had this realization. I realized what I was missing, what I didn't have that day, something that I always had, was I didn't feel any fear for the first time in my life that I can recall. And it's not going to turn into an Oprah moment, but I realized that I didn't have any fear now. And I was never aware that fear was a factor in my life until that moment of its first absence. It was a deeply, my wife is Irish. She has all these great Irish sayings. One of them is, I felt like myself from the toes up. And by that barn, I felt like myself from the toes up. And I just went, oh, there I am. And to continue ranting, I'd had that feeling just once before when I was 15 years old, when I walked out on stage in my high school play as the Artful Dodger in Oliver. And since none of you were there, I can tell you I was absolutely brilliant. And I was, because I felt like myself from the toes up. I just walked out on that stage and went, there I am. And, Tennessee Williams, the great playwright, has a line. He said, it was talking about love. He said, it was as if a room that had always been half in shadow was suddenly in the light. And that's how I felt about myself when I walked out on stage at 15. And then I hadn't felt that feeling again. And you could draw a string to it till I felt that way by the side of the barn. I just went, I'm not afraid right now. And that was a liberating feeling that changed my life. I skipped across the rest of Spain. The history that had been uninteresting was fascinating. I met wonderful, interesting people. There was a before and after moment in my life. And that, that started me traveling the world. That's why I became a travel writer and I started writing books, and everything can be traced to that moment. So thanks for coming out. Anyway,
how long?
I'll be quicker the next answer.
No. So, and that sort of absence of fear, is that something you were able to keep with you?
No, I mean, fear is obviously a cunning foe. It seeps like water. But once you have an awareness of it, it can never have the blind hold on us that it had before, right? And, I'm a fearful person. I wake up often most days and, fear's at the bottom of the bed going, good, I'm glad you're awake. I got a lot to talk about. You know what I mean? I'd say I deal with that on a daily basis ever since. But, the more you're used to, now I'm used to the guy at the end of the bed, shit, okay, come on, let's take a shower. And off you go and you do your stuff. But I've come to view fear as sort of like my superpower, as the kids say, in the sense that all of us are so, or most of us anyway, are so filled with fear and either don't know it or don't acknowledge it and push it away. And so when I see people behaving and reacting, I often can see, because I carry so much of my own fear and fearfully react so often, that I can just see it in them. And I just go, oh, I know what they're doing. They're reacting out of, okay, I'm good with it. I understand. So I'm not taking things as personally, or I can navigate around it, or very rarely I'll just confront it. Like if it's one of my kids, I'll go, you're just scared. I'm not scared. And our first reaction, of course, is to be defensive. I'm not scared, because fear is weakness, and weakness is vulnerability, and we don't want any of that. And that's what I'm always, that is where our strength lies. And yet, particularly as men, we're told, shut that down. So anyway, so I've come to view fear as sort of my greatest strength in many ways.
I mean, that's one of the most, I found as a father of many children, including some boys.
How many?
5.
Whew. I have 3. It feels like 30.
Yeah. Well, I had 2, and then Liz and I had 1, and then
you
we
don't
had
know
twins.
me any explanations.
Yeah.
You have twins? Oh, geez.
I have twins.
Wow.
So
okay.
bonus child. But it was quite, your level of insight was extraordinary. The amount of thought you have put into how your son operates in the world, I found very moving and quite challenging. I thought, I don't think about my children enough, was sort of one of my experiences. And I have often thought I would like them to walk the Camino. Because I think unless you've done it, it's quite hard to explain it. And everyone will say to me, well, are you Catholic? I'm not Catholic, I'm an atheist.
I did it for most people do it for no religious reason at this point. And there's certainly a spiritual component that happens to you, like it or not, but for me it had nothing to do with religion either.
And that was one of my questions. So for me it was the most spiritual of experiences an atheist can have, I guess, and quite amorphous in a way I find difficult. I was 1 or 2 years sober when I did it, and so I was grappling with the sort of questions around that stuff. But it was
interesting. I was 2.5 years sober when I did it the first time. Yeah.
Yes, it turns out there's a reason Jamie wanted me to interview you about this. It was like, I'm not someone who cries easily, but I cried multiple times during the course of this book. But one of the things was people, I'd explain it as one of the most spiritual, one of the most present experiences. I'm not someone who's terribly present. It was one of the times I felt most grounded, present. The noise was less than ever before, and I've missed that experience, and I'd love for my children to have it. Was it somewhat spiritual for you as an experience? First time, second time?
Profoundly. I mean, the reason I did it with my son, I'd been bragging or trying to tell them about it. Like you said, it's hard to express to people, but for 25 years, and go, we got to do that, and the only reason I got my son to go with me was because he had his girlfriend, he was 19, his girlfriend had just broken up with him, and he was just moping around the house. And I, being a savvy parent in that moment, I saw his vulnerability and his weakness, and I pounced. And I said, Sam, you want to walk across Spain? I said, Whatever. I literally went to the other room, got my computer, and bought 2 plane tickets, and 2 days later, we were in Spain. Because if I'd given him time to recover in a week, he would have bounced back. He would have, no fucking way am I going to, I'm not walking across Spain with you. You out of your mind? And, you know, on day 2, spoiler alert, my son, and forgive my French, but my son on day 2 said, Dad, what's the point of this fucking walk? And on the last day, he said, Dad, that's the only 10 out of 10 thing I've ever done in my life. You know, so the Camino happens to you, like it or not. You know what I mean? There's something about inexorably, you know, and walking a long way that, you know, many great minds and spirits have talked about the power of walking for a long time. And there's something profound that happens. And all you have to do is walk. There's nothing else that has to happen. You don't have to try and figure stuff. In my experience, I didn't have to try and figure stuff out. I didn't have to, you know, just walk. Get up and walk. And there's the freedom in our culture, particularly the freedom of like, all you have to do every day is get up and walk, find some food, and you got to find a place to sleep. And both those things are very easy to do on the Camino. So your obligations are minimal, and yet you will come up against yourself, as you know, time and time again, and it's sometimes awful. But, you know, there's also great camaraderie, there are great laughs, and, you know, with my son, I just found myself, I had the ultimate luxury we have with adult children, which is time. You know, I had a captive audience there with him, and I would wait every day and not speak, really. I said, good morning, Samuel, let's go. And it would, whether it took him 5 minutes or 2 hours, eventually he would go, so then she said, and he would just start, and he had hours of vomiting to do about his relationship and this kind of thing. And that the privilege that I got to be there to get that, which I never would have happened. You know, normally at home, you know, he's running out the door and I'd say, hey, you want to get some sushi tonight? All right, see you later. You know, and so I had that luxury to just, and I told myself very early on, just don't advise, don't have wisdom, just be there with him, walk beside him. You know, and then eventually he would occasionally go, what do you think? And I go, well, actually, now that you mention it, here's what I think, you know. But, you know, and so it was a very, you know, it changed our relationship because I also wanted myself, you know, I left home at 17 and never looked back. My relationship with my dad ended basically when I left home at 17. And we were not close the rest of his life. And that's one of the great, probably the regret of my life in a certain way. I don't think it could have been other, given who we were, but I didn't want that to happen with my kid. And I saw him with his girlfriend disappearing from us. You know, I saw him leaving, and to the point where my wife even said, I think it's in the book, she said, so when Sam just walked in and walked out one day, she said, is that it? Is that Sam just gone from our life now? And I was, oh my God, it's happening. You know, and I didn't want that with all my heart. I didn't want to repeat that. You know, so when this moment happened and he was vulnerable and I pounced and we went, I wanted to rewrite our relationship to transition it as much as possible to an adult relationship as opposed to a parent, dominant, child, rebellious, or acquiescing relationship, you know? So that was my goal, if I had a goal. And the way I chose to do that was knowing that the Camino would do the work and I didn't have to. I just had to walk beside him and let that happen. And that's what happened. You know, and to the example of how that happened, you know, not long ago, my son, it's 2 years now. My son walked it the next summer, by the way. He went back and walked the Camino on his own again. Oh. Yeah, and he wants to go again this year. And I'm like, dude, do something else. But he said to me, he called me on the phone. He finally moved out, thank God. He's 21 now. And but we missed him, you know. But he finally called me on the phone. He goes, Dad, you got 7 minutes? And I said, go. You know what I mean? And he said, so, and he just wanted to pound something out and talk something through. And that wouldn't have happened before we went to Spain, you know? And I just listened to him and I said, yeah, it sounds, you know, I don't know what I said. I tried to say as little as possible because you always want to fix it and know better. And, you know, they don't really want that generally. So, anyhow.
So it remains changed, the relationship?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, it's as like you went to the Camino. You're altered after that. You know, something happened. Like I said, you know, my fear didn't suddenly magically lift forever, but my relationship to it changed, and relationship to me changed, and you know, yeah, it's one of the only sort of. I don't know anybody who did it whose life didn't alter for the better.
No, but your relationship with Sam remains
it's altered,
changed.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Because one of my excuses for not going.
It was always good. I should say we always had a nice relationship, but it has, you know, evolved since then. That sort of took it and elevated it to what I hoped it would do. Is sort of. I'm still his father always. I don't need to be his buddy or his pal, but I'm want to have, he's an adult, even though he acts like a, imbecile half the time. But so do I, so, I had a big disappointment last week and he said, well, what you had said to me once, Dad, when I had one. I said, what? He said, let you know you still have a pulse. And I said, and you didn't hit me when I said that? But anyway, so yeah, it has changed. Yeah.
Is it something you do with the other two children, or how do they feel about the fact there's a book about Sam?
Well, like all my other books, like I wrote a book earlier about my wife in a certain way, about, getting married. It's my second marriage, and my first book I wrote was about sort of how do we have our inherent, and I'm a very solitary person in many ways, how do we have our inherent solitude and yet find connection with another person? How do we create that intimacy and yet still maintain our singularity? And, I wrote a whole book about that. So it's about my wife, but it's all about me and what a buffoon I am trying to figure this stuff out. So it's about Sam, but really it's about me figuring out how to parent him. I don't think it's my place to I didn't talk about all the things he said with his girlfriend. That's his, and it's not for me it's not a tell-all book. It was more an exploration of my own process, and I bounce off him to do that. It's about parenting, not being a kid with a parent, and I can't write from his point of view. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So, but my other kids, to your question, my daughter is 16, Willow, and she said, can we just go to Paris?
Right.
And so we did. And my young son he was 8 at the time. He read about a page of the book. When the book comes, when you write a book, the book comes, they're mailed to you, you open up the carton, and there's the book. It's finally there, and you're holding it, and my son grabbed it, and he read about a paragraph, and I was just watching him read. And he said, closed it. Quiet for a minute. He said, this would have been a much better book if it was about me.
Yeah, great.
And so he says he wants to do the Camino, and I'm like, okay, I hurry up because I'm aging out of this, but but anyhow, yeah.
It's been one of my excuses not to go back is the children, and suddenly it's like, oh, it should be done with the children. I'm like, oh no, my whole excuse for not doing this again is removed by your book. So I feel rather compelled to do it now.
Well, it was interesting too to go, because there are many routes to the Camino. Did you walk the Francés?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the main route, the route that I walked as well. And there are several routes that people go, but I wanted to go back and walk the same route. And if I did it again, I'd want to walk the same route again, because there's something about pilgrimage. There's nothing, the only discovery, millions of people have walked this. There's nothing to be discovered except internally. And everyone walks a very, after my first one, I stayed in touch with some people for a while, and this woman that I knew from Germany, she was in town, and she brought along with her this Canadian fellow who was also on our walking the same time that we walked. We weren't that close really walking, but I knew him, and we were walking on the same schedule, same days, and he brought his photos along. This was years ago after the first one. He brought his photos along, and I didn't recognize anything of that Camino. His Camino was we walked the same route, the same days just about, and it was entirely different. Everyone's Camino is deeply personal and private. Like my son walked beside me the whole way, and we had two very different experiences. When he read the book, well, he listened to the book. He didn't read the book, and he narrated it with me in the audio. We did it together. He did his lines and stuff. But he was like, "Wow, that's what you were thinking then, Dad? Why didn't you tell me that?" Which is, it brings up that whole notion of like, what do we share with our kids, and how much do we withhold and stuff like that. And that I find a challenging parental aspect. And I still don't have the answer necessarily for that. Like how much and what do we share with our kids? I remember my mother telling me stuff when I was little that she probably shouldn't have told me. Mm-hmm. And those weren't her feelings. That was her mood. Those weren't her deeply settled, established feelings. That was a mood she was in. But as a young kid, I took that as truth. And that stayed with me. And it wasn't her truth. It was her mood. And those are different things. So there's sometimes I try and not do that. But there are other truths that I could share. If I want to have an adult relationship with my child, when does he need me to share? When does the relationship demand that I share of myself? As opposed, if I don't want just a one-sided relationship of me parenting him, when do I go? I get so upset and so scared, Sam, that he's not going to, I tell that to my 10-year-old, he's going to feel unsafe in the world. But if I tell it to my 20-year-old, I go, Dad, what if you did that? I'm like, oh, Jesus. That's good, Sam. You know what I mean? And so I'm making that transition. I'm still awkwardly, navigating that. So, if you have any advice,
talked about it. The time when you were walking along this path and it was quite narrow, and then you veered off it and tripped on a milestone, I think, and you sort of missed it. You talked about your jaw possibly fracture, and that moment of frailty where he gets to see you as, you know, not godlike, as someone who's
It was
vulnerable.
a huge moment. Yeah, we were walking and talking. You know, we were walking on the trail, talking, and you know, the trail narrowed, so one person had to go in front of the other, and you can't really talk well one in front. You know, anyway, so I got off the trail and started walking, and I tripped on a rock, and I went, and there are these markers along the way, these sort of cement pylons telling you how far you have to go, and I went flying down hard, and I had a backpack on, so once you start to go, it suddenly feels like someone's pushing you down, and so the pylon, I went right past my head, you know, with inches, and as you get older, you realize, shit, that could have been a life changer. That could have shattered my jaw. That could have done all sorts of things. So anyway, I missed it. But when I fell, I hit hard. Like you said, my tendency when I fall, because I'm pretty agile in life, if I fall, I'm so embarrassed. I just bounce back up. I'm fine. I'm good. Yep, no, that didn't happen. You know, and I move on. And I'm embarrassed by any attention to it. But I fell, and I hit hard, and I was so startled that I stayed on the ground, and I was suddenly, like you said, I was so embarrassed that my son saw me as frail and weak, God forbid, and not, you know, vulnerable. And then I just realized, so I tried to get up for a second, and I just, no, I couldn't. And just because I was startled so much, and I just realized, just stay there. And Sam, of course, yeah, Dad, are you know. I said, and I did, luckily, had the voice, the Camino gods came in and said, just let him help you. And it was a huge thing for me, to let my son help me, and let him see me as not, you know, the dude with it together, you know, and that was a huge, you know, but there are other times when, like, I think I mentioned the book once, my son says, how you doing, Dad? And I'd spent the whole morning just being angry at my wife in my head and worried about money. And what, you know, you get on that little treadmill and you just, and I was really grinding away. He said, how are you, Dad? And I said, yeah, I'm good, I'm fine. And it was a real missed opportunity to share with my son. So those were two examples of handling it, what I would say, well for me, or that was my objective. If I want my son to have an equal relationship, I've got to let him see me. So that was it, you know, and like many things in life, the things that appear to be bad turn into blessings, you know, and that was a minor one, of course, but, you know, I fall, that's bad, but I let him help me and he gets to see me and we get closer, that's good, you know. And so what's useful in that kind of example is it's small and minute and doesn't really have consequence. But that's the same thing that happens with bigger stuff in our life. You know, I just made a whole movie about the Brat Pack, you know, this thing that happened when I was a young kid. And I went back and I talked to all those actors 35 years later. And that was a life-changing, seminal event in our lives. We hated the term Brat Pack, hated it. We thought it, you know, really altered and ruined a lot of our careers, a lot of the people thought. And so but the public never saw it that way. They saw it as this wonderful thing. And, you know, so we've become the avatars of a certain generation's youth, and they look at us with great affection, you know. And so something that had been, if that name didn't exist, if the Brat Pack name didn't exist, for those of you who know it, like, I would have just been some guy who did some rando 80s movies. But now I'm part of some iconically pop culture moment that defines the 80s in a certain way. And so that thing that we hated so much has become, over decades, this beautiful thing. And to recognize the morphing of that. There's been I digress. But I mean, those kind of things that we perceive as awful often can become, if we stay diligent and stay open to them, really profound gifts. You know, I mean, mentioned alcoholism earlier. Like, people always say, oh, getting sober was the greatest thing that happened to me. I've come to believe that being an alcoholic was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, even taking it one step further, because of the gifts and the way I had to learn how to live by stopping drinking, and the help that I had to ask for, and all the tools that I learned from that. Never would have, yes, it was great. It was prerequisite that I got sober, so that was great. But the gift of the, what's that Greek phrase, the cracked vase lasts longest. There's something really profound in that. And when we can do that with, I'm really on a tangent, but when we can do that with life, that's, we take back our power and kind of can see the wonder in things again. I don't know. You talk.
No, I'm a psychotherapist. This is very comfortable territory. Asking questions, I do that better. I mean, definitely breaking that pattern that you've described. I left home early, had a difficult relationship with my father. So the pressure then to correct the relationships without a clear roadmap, because there isn't, right. For me, there's no, I mean, I can read, Bradshaw or whatever I like, but they never sit right. So you're making stuff up as you go along, right? The experience of the reparative relationship that you're breaking, that's possibly generations, is one of the biggest gifts for me of, I mean, whether I ended up in recovery or not. For some reason, going down a journey where there's introspection and ability to try to figure out the world, and it was. I mean, going on the Camino, more than being in rehab or any of that, really.
The Camino was much better than rehab.
Was
I agree.
100, like, you know, in Belgium, there's still a standing law that if you commit an incarcerable crime before the age of 21, you can elect to walk the Camino.
Really?
Instead, which is genius.
That is.
And they can track,
Where
right?
is this? In where?
It's on the statutes in Belgium.
In Belgium. Right.
So, because they can track, right? So you have a book which gets stamped when you stay in the sort of hostels, which for me matters more than just about anything I've collected in my life. I have this book and it has, you know, the record of where we were and where we walked. And there was this idea that actually you could just, if you've done something terrible, you can walk the Camino rather than sitting in a young offenders institution for 2 years. I mean, it'd be a lot more effective.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that pilgrim passport and the stamp on it. Yeah, as you walk, you get this little piece of paper, this accordion-like piece of paper that is like, and you get it stamped in every village along the way that you stay at, so that when you reach Santiago, they can give you can get this thing called a Compostela, which proves that you've walked the Camino. Which to me, I didn't even get my Compostela the last time, but have that pilgrim passport. I framed my sons, both his trips, and they're up on his wall, you know, and gave them to him for Christmas, and he was like so moved by that. And they're an amazing kind of talisman for that. Yeah.
I also tried to bring my stick back home.
I did too. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Heathrow was not happy about it. They're like, "What is this?" And I said, "It's a stick I found in the woods, and I carved it the whole way." And like, okay, but it looks like a weapon. They're like, no, it's a spiritual stick. You know, that was unpopular. Anyway, I digress. So would you do it again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I'd like to give it some time in the sense that the lessons of the Camino are learned slowly. You know, it's like the Camino itself. It takes a while to sort of emerge up, you know. So, yeah, I'd love to do it one more time. And Sam has sort of made me promise I'll do it again with him. And we'll see if Rowie, my youngest, wants to do it, and we'll all go traipsing across Spain. And the ladies in the family have said they'll meet us in Santiago. But yeah, I'd like to do it one more time. Sure. And I'd like to do the same route. I think that's what I got off that, but I'd like to do the same route again because there's something about going back and seeing how it's the same, but how you've changed in it. You know, there's something in that that's really, I think, profound.
I felt pretty upset when you were talking about arriving at the cathedral in Santiago, because actually the ritualistic nature of walking in, you know, placing your hand, that stopped. I was like, oh, don't want to do this. Sounds like there's too many bikes now. You know, you can't go through.
I mean, it's a victim like many things. It's a victim of its own success. And yet, it still has to be walked, you know. So, and as my son said, there are these rituals. And along the way, there are many rituals, too. And then when you arrive in the cathedral in Santiago, you would put your hand in a certain stone. You would touch your head to the saint. You would hug the statue of the saint. All these kind of things that a pilgrim would do when they arrived. You couldn't do a couple of them because they don't allow it anymore, and a couple because it was post-COVID and they didn't want people, whatever. So, but that's when my son did, and I was so upset. I was in tears. I was just starting to well up because I was just like so disappointed because I was so tired and we made it. I want to do this stuff, and I just was so disappointed. And my son just came over and parented me, and he just said, "Dad, this one was about the journey," you know, and he wasn't being ironic or cynical. Yeah. He was I'm being embarrassed now, so I'm saying it the way, but this was about the journey, you know, and he just had his arm around. And I just sat there and let him parent me in that moment again, you know, and it was a beautiful thing that he said that. And he was absolutely right.
Yeah. I'm going to open up for questions in a minute. Just one last thing. The characters you meet along the road that you describe.
Well, that's a huge part of the Camino, these characters you meet. Yeah.
And it's weird. There are people I remember crystal clear. Yeah. And I've traveled the world. I've met many people. They have no right to inhabit my memory in such a distinct, but they do. Crystal clear. I remember
Yeah.
The Mexican guy, I remember the two, hippies who hooked up. I remember all of that, the stuff you talk about. Why is that?
I don't know.
What is that about?
I don't know, but it's very true. There are certain, and both times when I walked, I spent the first half I spent alone the first time, then I met all these wonderful people after that moment in the wheat field. This time, Sam and I spent the first half basically alone, just talking, and the second half part of community. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about, I'm a person who can isolate very much, so that the community of the Camino is really potent and powerful and a real rich part of the experience, for sure. And yeah, these people still inhabit my brain too.
No.
And I don't know why. I don't know anything about them.
No, I'm not in touch with them, but I remember everything.
Well, so now I am, like with Instagram and things, I'm in touch with a couple of the people from the second one. Anyhow.
Irish?
No, I'm not in touch with him. No, Jesus. He was, no. But the boys and a couple others, yeah.
Anyway, thank you. I'm going to open up for questions. Yes.
It took about, it's about 30 days, 31, 32 days. And then, the Camino ends in Santiago, but you can walk for 3 more days to a place called Finisterre, to the sea, which is sort of but the Camino officially ends at the cathedral, but many walkers, did you walk to Finisterre?
I didn't.
I didn't either. But many walkers feel the urge to walk to the sea, and my son, when he learned about Finisterre, he said, I'm walking to Finisterre, Dad, let's do it. I'm like, no, if I make it to Santiago, I'm sitting myself down, you walk. And it was in that instant, though, that I knew I had a book, because the whole notion of our children going beyond our accomplishments is what we all want as parents, right? So the idea that I would arrive in Santiago and my son would go beyond me to the sea and so then it gave him bragging rights, as my youngest says, so that he could say, yeah, my dad walked across most of Spain. I walked across all of Spain. So he walked to Finisterre. I took a taxi out to meet him in Finisterre 3 days later and welcomed him, and let him walk into my arms, which is, I'm going to cry now. It's a beautiful thing. But the idea that he went on beyond me was, I just thought, fantastic. So it's about 33 days. But, you can take as long as you want. I would have stopped for more rest days. But my son, once you start meeting people, everyone's walking at this pace. So you want to meet them again every night in the next village for dinner and the next, so it sort of gathers its own momentum. I think we took 1 rest day along the way. But it's about a month. And I recommend if you were to go do it, and there are a lot of people that just do the last week or 2 weeks, or some people that go for a week. Next year they go back and do another week. Next year, and do it that way. Fine, great. I would recommend, if you have the time and the inclination, that the attrition that happens and the thing that happens over the long haul is what makes it profound and meaningful. Going for a nice 5-day hike, that's nice, but that's not the experience that we've been talking about. So if you have the time and inclination, I would recommend fighting through it. Hi. You walk about 12 to 15. It's very civilized. That's what you're doing all day. You get up, you walk, and there are lots of little villages along the way. And, these little towns sprung up along the way through the centuries, about a day's distance apart for walkers. So, there are facilities. And now, when we walked it the first time, there were not many facilities. They're like these albergues at the church, like dormitories, refuges that, the churches would set up with bunk bed dormitory type things. You pay $1 or €1 and you can sleep for the night. Those still exist, but there are also many little, like I said to myself, I'm too old for this now. I don't want people climbing. I don't need to be on the top bunk and climbing over me to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. We're going to a little inn, And, and half the time we stayed in albergues, refugios, and half the time in little, I want a shower. I want my own shower, So there, all the services are there to support you. You're not hiking in the wilderness. You're part of the world. But it's pretty remote at times, very remote. And there are also, and you walk through several big cities. You walk through Pamplona, which is a great city, and Logroño and Burgos and León. So every week you get to a sizable city where you can, have a nice city experience. And there's something really interesting about walking into and out of a city. You know what I mean? Walking from there, one morning going into Burgos, which is a city of about 180,000, you walk from a village of 13 people the night before, and then you walk into a city of 100, and then the next day you walk back out into a village of 20 people. There's something interesting about walking into society again, and then the relief of leaving again. Yes. You need much less. You don't need a tent.
I'm going to repeat the question. Do you carry a day pack? Or?
You'll carry too much. and you'll either mail it home or
Always.
you'll leave it by the side. Sorry?
Always.
Always. The first time I went, I bought a tent, I bought heavy leather hiking, I bought like a 50-pound pack, and I left stuff by the side of the trail constantly. And you'll see things by the side of the trail. It's a physical metaphor for the discarding that people are doing along the way. But you really need a pair of sneakers like these. You can walk across in these, and you don't need heavy. I bought heavy leather hiking boots the first time going, literally on the way to the airport I bought them. Everyone knows you have to break in leather hiking boots, but I didn't think this applied to me. And so, anyway, I had terrible blisters. I had to stop for a week the first trip. But this time I walked in day hikers. And you need a pair of, it depends what time of year you go. We went in the summer when it's blisteringly hot in August. But, you need nothing. You can buy things. You need a couple T-shirts. You need a pair of shorts. You need a pair of pants and a sweatshirt in the evening. That's all you need. You'll bring too much if you go, and you'll go, oh, why do I have this? And you'll carry it for a week and go, and then you go, fuck it. You just leave it there. And somebody else who needs it will pick it up and wear it. You know what I mean? And so you need less, like in life, you need much less than we think we do.
Take that advice if you're going to go. That's
really true.
And
get a small pack, because you get a big pack, you'll fill it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes.
Take notes along the way.
Yeah, I mean,
Did
I'm a
you
travel
take notes
Did I
along
take
the
notes
way?
along the way? Yeah, I'm a travel writer, so it means I'm always somewhere. I know I'm always going to write about something in some way. And so I was taking notes, a little bit. And then once my son said that about going to Finisterre, I went, oh, no, I have a book. So then I really started taking notes. But it's amazing once but the Camino is broken up into such chunks, daily chunks, that it stays with you. And then, you have these guidebooks, which you can get, which I carried. So lots, it stays with you. But I'm also, I took notes.
Yes. Did you find yourself annoyed in the last 100 kilometers when you get people joining who perhaps haven't done the whole Camino, saying, buen camino, which is a phrase I was unfamiliar with? Is that annoying? Are they seen as newbies, or somehow having not done the whole journey?
Frauds?
Frauds?
That's
your words, not mine.
That's Sam's word. Sam had a big problem with that, and he openly said, look at these frauds, these Camino newbies. And you can tell because they're very pale, their packs are new, their shoes are crisp, their socks are white, and, they're eager. And
limping. Limping.
Yes. But when you're as old and wise as me, you kind of incorporate. You go, no, Sam, give them a break. No, but I didn't care. But Sam really found it really offensive. But I did want to say something else about it, but I can't remember. Yeah, I mean, the buen camino. There's a phrase that people say on the trail now called buen camino, which I think is like this ridiculous, banal phrase that the tourist bureau thought up. When we walked it the first time, the phrase I always heard was un abrazo por Santiago, a hug for the saint. Meaning, because there's a statue, which we mentioned earlier, behind the high altar of Santiago, of St. James. And the pilgrim is to go and hug that statue and thank people in that moment, thank all those along the way who helped you. So the old ladies who used to, because back then, particularly, all those villages were dying. All the kids went to the city, so it was just old widows, women still dressed in black when their husband had died 30 years ago. These little stout women were sweeping off their front porches wearing black, and they would go, "Un abrazo por Santiago," as you'd pass. And you'd go, "Sí, claro." And, and so you'd hug the saint and just think of them for a moment. But then Buen Camino came into being, and I thought it was a terrible, but everyone says it, so by the end I'm going, Buen Camino, So you can't beat them, join them,
Amazing. All right, I think quickly.
Yeah. Well, I can answer the rest of your question. When did because we only have 36 seconds. When did I see the Brat Pack going from something negative to positive? Really, when I wrote a memoir about it about 5 years ago, I wrote a book called Brat about my time there, and I realized a friend of mine, I wrote a draft, and I gave it to a friend to read, and he said, "What's this called?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "The name of this book is Brat." And I said, "Forgive me, F you. This book will never be called Brat." And I realized in that instant I hadn't done my work, and so I went and thought about the whole thing, and that's really what changed my feeling on the Brat Pack to becoming an embracing thing and realizing what a gift it had been to me. And I was very grateful for him for saying that after I got done being angry at him. But yeah, thanks, guys.
Great. Thank you very much.